The late 1960s were a golden age for Philippine cinema. Movie houses were filled with stars who brought light, beauty, and dreams to a nation eager for escape. Among them was Maggie Deariva, one of the brightest names of her time, admired, adored, and destined for greatness. But behind the glamour of the spotlight, her life would be pulled into darkness. A single night in 1967 changed everything, when privilege, arrogance, and cruelty converged to commit one of the most infamous crimes in Philippine history. You're listening to Pinoy True Crime Story, where we uncover the nation's most haunting and unforgettable cases, told through raw, immersive storytelling that lets the victims' voices be heard. It was the late 1960s in Manila, a time when the city was alive with glamour, cinema, and the rising stars of Philippine show business. Among these stars was a young woman whose name shone brightly on the silver screen, Maggie Deariva. She was admired not just for her beauty, but for her talent, charisma, and the promise of a long and glittering career. But behind the lights of stardom, Maggie's life would be thrown into one of the darkest nightmares any woman could endure. A crime so shocking that it would change her life forever and echo across the nation for decades. Maggie Deariva was already a household name. Born into a modest family, she worked her way into the movie industry with determination, eventually becoming one of the most recognizable faces in Philippine cinema. But her fame, which brought her fortune and fans, would also attract the wrong kind of attention. Men whose sense of entitlement and arrogance made them believe they could take anything they wanted, regardless of the cost. One night in 1967, Maggie's life took a horrifying turn. It began with what seemed like an ordinary day. She was on her way home after filming, exhausted but satisfied with her work. But unknown to her, she was being watched. 4 young men from wealthy and well-connected families had set their eyes on her. They were not ordinary criminals. They were from influential circles, sons of the elite. To them, their privilege gave them immunity, and their desires, no matter how dark, were all that mattered. The men followed Maggie, waiting for the right moment. Then, late in the night, they struck. Maggie was forcibly taken and held against her will. What followed was a nightmare of abuse, a crime that no woman, no person, should ever endure. In those harrowing hours, Maggie was robbed of her dignity, her sense of safety, and her peace. But even in the face of unimaginable suffering, she held on with courage that would later make her a symbol of strength. When the night was over, the men believed they could silence her. After all, who would believe a young actress against the sons of the powerful? They thought their money, their families' names, and their influence would shield them from any consequence. But Maggie was not willing to stay silent. With the support of her family and friends, she did the unthinkable in a time when victims of such crimes were often shamed into silence. She went to the authorities, told her story, and demanded justice. The case of People of the Philippines versus Francisco Larrañaga et al. The infamous Maggie Deariva case quickly captured the nation's attention. Newspapers splashed her story across their pages. For the first time, the Filipino public saw the stark contrast between privilege and accountability, between the rich who thought they could buy their way out of crime and a young woman determined to stand against them. The 4 men were arrested and brought to trial. During the proceedings, Maggie displayed extraordinary bravery. She testified in court, reliving her trauma in front of strangers, lawyers, and judges, with the eyes of the nation upon her. It was a time when talking about such crimes was taboo, when victims were often blamed rather than supported. Yet Maggie refused to be silenced. She told the court, in painful detail, what had been done to her. Her testimony, along with the evidence presented, left little doubt about the guilt of her attackers. The public followed the case closely, horrified by the crime but inspired by Maggie's courage. For many Filipinos, it was the first time they saw a woman stand so firmly against men of wealth and power. After a lengthy trial, the court delivered its verdict. The four men were found guilty of the heinous crime and were sentenced to death by electric chair. It was one of the rare instances when individuals from powerful families faced the ultimate punishment for their actions. For Maggie, the verdict was bittersweet. Justice had been served, but nothing could erase the scars of what she had endured. On May 17, 1972, the sentence was carried out. The four men were executed at the National Penitentiary in Muntinlupa. Their deaths marked one of the last times the Philippines would use the electric chair as a method of execution. Outside the prison, crowds gathered, some in protest, others in grim satisfaction that justice had been served. But the story did not end there. For years, Maggie continued her life, forever marked by that night. She returned to show business, but her career and personal life were changed by the trauma she had endured. Still, she remained a symbol of resilience, an icon of courage for women who faced violence and oppression. She showed the nation that silence was not the only option, that even in the face of fear, there could be a fight for justice. The Maggie Deariva case remains one of the most infamous in Philippine true crime history. It was a story of violence, privilege, and ultimately, justice. It forced the nation to confront the reality of violence against women and the deep inequalities in society. And even decades later, Maggie's name continues to be remembered not just as a star of the screen, but as a woman who stood against the most powerful forces of her time and demanded justice. Her story is more than just a crime. It is a reminder of the strength of survivors, the importance of speaking out, and the need to continue fighting for a world where no one suffers as she did. Maggie Deariva's courage continues to inspire, echoing long after the crime, the trial, and the execution. This is the haunting yet powerful story of Maggie Deariva, a woman who, despite the horrors inflicted upon her, refused to let her voice be silenced, and whose pursuit of justice left an indelible mark on Philippine history. The case of Maggie Deariva was more than just a crime, it was a reckoning. It showed the nation that even the powerful could be brought to justice, and that one woman's courage could ignite conversations about violence, privilege, and accountability. Decades have passed, but Maggie's story remains a reminder. Silence protects the guilty, but courage gives power to the truth. This has been Pinoy True Crime Story. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so that more Filipinos can hear the stories of those who can no longer speak for themselves. Until the next case, stay safe and never stop seeking justice.